I didn't want to put out a newsletter like everybody else. I grew up on magazines like Rolling Stone and Sports Illustrated. And I'm like, you know what? I'm going to put out a big, glossy, high-end, kick-ass magazine. And people were like, you're crazy. What do you know about publishing a magazine? And the answer was absolutely nothing. When you know the rules, you're going to feel constrained to do things a certain way. Tiffany, I just thought I was weird. I wasn't celebrating it. But later on in life, in business, as I consistently was a contrarian and I was showing up differently, I was like, wow, I'm hitting levels of success that my peers aren't hitting. And I had to look back and say, why is that the case? I didn't have more connections. I wasn't smarter. I didn't have more money. I wasn't better looking. I didn't have any perceived advantage. The advantage I had is I was unafraid to take the road less traveled. You have to show up as your authentic self. I think you can't fake who you are. So whoever you genuinely are, that's how you should show up in the world. And I think oftentimes people don't want to be left out of an opportunity. And I would say if you're open to everything, you're kind of open to nothing. People don't know what to do with you.
Everybody, like you said, wants the attention. They're screaming louder, more frequently into a mic. But both you and I know that that doesn't necessarily equal influence, and it sure as shit doesn't equal money. If someone were be listening to this podcast right now, they want to have real influence, not just social media followers, but actual power to change their trajectory. What is the first concrete step that you can give them to do? Sitting with Scott MacGregor, who has built a media empire by doing everything the publishing industry says was impossible. Publisher and editor-in-chief of Outlier Magazine, founder of a talent strategy company, American Business Award winner. But here's what makes Scott different. He didn't start with connections, capital, or a journalist degree, if I'm correct. This is Confluently. I'm Tiffany Hart. We cut through the bullshit and we get to how influence really works. Scott, welcome to the show.
Tiffany, I am fired up to be here. I love your vibe. I love this podcast. So let's do it.
That's what I'm talking about. Let's go ahead and start a little bit with Outlier. So Outlier Magazine, very cute name, okay? Publishing really is considered a boys' club full of trust fund babies and Ivy League connections that think they're important. When did you realize that being locked out of that world was actually better than being stuck inside of it?
I never really thought about that, to be honest with you. I mean, I started the magazine, so I also have a community called the Outlier Project, which is a fairly large community of about 750 people. And quite honestly, I didn't want to put out a newsletter like everybody else. I grew up on magazines like Rolling Stone and Sports Illustrated. And I'm like, you know what? I'm going to put out a big, glossy, high-end, kick-ass magazine. And people were like, you're crazy. What do you know about publishing a magazine? And the answer was absolutely nothing. Other than I know when I read a good magazine, I know I like it, and I know aesthetically what I think it would look like. And we lived into the answers and figured it out along the way.
Absolutely love that. Really thinking about that with your try something new now.com versus the outlierproject.co. You've really got multiple brands and multiple websites. Most entrepreneurs can really only barely manage one business and, if they're lucky, a website. But you're really running a talent strategy company and a publishing operation and an entire community and network with events. Are you a serial entrepreneur or do you just have ADHD?
I definitely have ADHD, which was diagnosed when I was an adult. And I figured, you know what, I've navigated my entire life, by compensating for it in different ways. So you build up these different things that you do really well to compensate for any issue that you might have. So I decided, like, I'm not going to try to fix it with medication or anything like that. So I definitely have ADHD, but I like to be busy. I'm fortunate in that I have an incredibly supportive wife, and I've been an empty nester for a long time. So I'm 57. I have a 31-year-old son and I have a 30-year-old son. Both of them joined the military right out of high school. So I've been an empty nester for a long time. So I have a lot of time to devote to these things that I'm really passionate about. So whether it's the Outlier Project with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of members, or if it's the magazine with 60,000 subscribers, or the talent strategy company I run, something new, I've got time for all of it. It's just a matter of, prioritizing stuff. I'm pretty good at that.
I like that. Side question on that. When you say prioritizing, how do you really think about that? When the world is on fire, all three businesses have something going on. How do you figure out what you're going to do first, second, third and fourth? What is your hierarchy that goes on in your brain?
Yeah, I think about the biggest rocks first, and try to tackle those. Those are typically things that are going to move the needle the most. Many times there's a revenue component to it. So it's kind of like what's closest to the bank, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's not directly tied to revenue, but it's something that will move the needle in a very significant way. And those are the things that I do first. So I try not to major in the minors and get caught up in a lot of stuff that, at the end of the day, Tiffany, I could justify pretty much anything because, it's not like I'm sorting my sock drawer and, doing the dishes. They're all things that are related to the business, but there are, clearly things that are a much bigger priority. So you got to take care of those big rocks. So it's important to identify what those are and then make sure that you're hyper focused on making sure that shit gets done. Because if it doesn't, the other stuff doesn't matter.
Absolutely.
Makes sense. I mean, it's why I get up every day at 5 o'clock and I do the thing that I really don't want to do, which is I get my 5 miles in and I do a workout. And I know that if I leave that for later, there will be a million excuses or things that get in the way. So that's a big rock for me personally. That kind of sets up my day. So I get that done first thing in the morning. So it's a very similar concept.
Absolutely right. So you won the American Business Award for innovation. What did you innovate that traditional publishing world thought was either impossible or just really fucking stupid?
Great question. So I won the American Business Awards for innovation for my talent strategy company, Something New, not for the Outlier
Okay.
magazine. I mean, the way that we won those awards was we did not pay attention to the way the industry. So this would apply. It doesn't really matter whether it's the magazine, the community, or the talent strategy business. It would apply in any way because I do this stuff in every single business that I run. I do not pay attention to the industry. So Sarah Blakely, who's the founder of Spanx and is the youngest self-made female billionaire ever, she always says going into an industry and not having industry experience is a real benefit. The reason why it's a benefit is you don't know the rules. When you know the rules, you're going to feel constrained to do things a certain way. I try to avoid my industry, whether it's publishing a magazine, running a community, or running a talent strategy business. I don't pay attention to the industry. I pay attention to things that may seem completely disconnected from them, but I like the way it makes me feel. So I'll give you an example. I may have a hospitality experience, or I might have an experience with a CPG brand. And I'm like, I love the way that made me feel. And then I try to figure out how do I take that and incorporate it into my business, even though my business is not a CPG business or it's not a hospitality business. And I think that's where you get innovation. There's a book that I recommend all the time that was written by Will Guidara called Unreasonable Hospitality. And so Will Guidara ran the #1 restaurant in the world, 11 Madison Park. So I've recommended the book many, many times. And I've had a couple people say, yeah, why would I read this? I'm not in the restaurant business. And the mistake that they're making is a mistake that a lot of people make, which is if you can't figure out how to gain inspiration and innovation from what he did in the hospitality space in a restaurant and apply it to your business, then I think you're probably not thinking hard enough, or you're probably more likely to follow the thundering herd and kind of have an average business. It's the same with podcasts. You show up differently in your podcast, and I think that's why you're successful. And so many people are like, this is the way a podcast is supposed to be. This is the way you're supposed to talk. These are the questions you're supposed to ask. And they follow that format. They may have a decent podcast, but they're probably not going to ever break out.
I really appreciate you saying such kind comments about my podcast, and you are absolutely right. I knew zero things about podcasting when I began. I just thought I had something to say. I knew a couple people that were cool, and I really wanted to learn about how this behind the scenes, how the sausage is made without the filter, the corporate speak, and the bullshit that goes into it, and forget the rules. I wanted to find the people that broke the rules. And that's what I really wanted to learn from, because I'm kind of a square peg in a round hole, you know?
Yeah. I agree. I mean, that's the story of my life. I've been an outlier since I was born. I knew I thought differently. As a young kid, you don't necessarily celebrate that. I mean, when I'm 7 or 8, 9 years old, and I realized, you know what, I think a little bit differently than my peers. Tiffany, I just thought I was weird. I wasn't celebrating it. But later on in life, in business, as I consistently was a contrarian and I was showing up differently, I was like, wow, I'm hitting levels of success that my peers aren't hitting. And I had to look back and say, why is that the case? I didn't have more connections. I wasn't smarter. I didn't have more money. I wasn't better looking. I didn't have any perceived advantage. The advantage I had is I was unafraid to take the road less traveled, which is not a road that most people are willing to take because it's lonely, it's scary, you're going to fall down, you're going to skin your knee. And most people would rather be with the thundering herd because they think safety is in numbers. I think the complete opposite.
I think that is the differential, right? That makes all the difference in the world while you're on that road that's less traveled, that, yes, will be lonely. Any given day, I think even you spend probably a good 20 to 30% of it defending your position rather than actually actioning on it. And it can be exhausting, right?
I agree. You have to show up as your authentic self. I think you can't fake, who you are. So whoever you genuinely are, that's how you should show up in the world. And I think if you have different thoughts and different ideas of how to do things, there's always many, many different ways to run any kind of business. Run it the way you think it should be run. And, you're going to figure out pretty quickly whether you're on the road to success or not. And then you can always pivot from there.
Let's talk a little bit about the business of influence. How are you actually monetizing being a publisher in 2025? Because most independent publishers are really broke as shit and they're pretending that they're not. How are you doing it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm blessed that I have some incredible friends. So I use the magazine as a platform to highlight the people that I love the most, which are outliers, which are people that are unafraid to show up differently, are unafraid to take the road less traveled. And, I'm fortunate that those people happen to be, you know, Layla Ali, the greatest female boxer of all time and daughter of Muhammad Ali, or Jesse Itzler, who, sold his first company, Marquis Jet, to Warren Buffett and is, married to Sarah Blakely, or Candace Nelson, who is a guest shark on Shark Tank. Because those are people that are friends of mine, I'm able to highlight them, which is a lot of fun. And because they have very large social media followings, the subscribers have been relatively easy to come by. So we're 6 issues in because it's a quarterly magazine, and we have 60,000 subscribers. So we've made a fair amount of headway, but I would say each issue that we put out, I think collectively the people that we feature have about 10 million followers. So if you put it in that perspective, our subscribers are a drop in the bucket in comparison to the influence that these folks have. And it's just been, the decision of how do we want to highlight the magazine in an interview format, by interviewing some of the most interesting people in the world who have ripped up the playbook and designed their own life and their own business and have done it with, a lot of enthusiasm. And, that seems to be so far the secret to success.
I absolutely love that. Kind of just touching quickly on, the Standing O series. Tell me about the economics of book publishing for someone who's not Stephen King.
Yes, so the books were actually an interesting story. So when I started my company, something new 10 years ago, giving back was really important to me. But I am a self described control freak. So I'm not afraid to say I'm an absolute control freak. Because of that, I did not want to take any VC funding. I didn't want anyone else telling me how to run the business. So with that, the decision was easy to bootstrap the business. But the problem is when you're bootstrapping a business, you're putting every dime that you make back into the business to keep it viable. So when you want to give back, that makes it pretty tough because you can't write big checks to these organizations that you care about. I very quickly had to figure out if I wanted to give back, how was I going to do that without the ability to write a big check? And I realized that my biggest asset was not a giant bank account. My biggest asset was a bank account of friends that were off the charts amazing. So I decided I would write a book called Standing O, an anthology where I would ask 52 of my friends to write chapters of gratitude for a life lesson learned. And then I would give 100% of the proceeds to charity. Dick Vermeil, who won a Super Bowl with the Rams, it is in the Football Hall of Fame. He wrote the foreword to my first book, and Tiki Barber, who's an all-time great for the New York Giants, wrote the cover quote. And then the Jesse Itzlers of the world, or Merrill Hodge from the Pittsburgh Steelers, or Heather Monahan, or all these amazing friends of mine wrote chapters of gratitude. And the book was very successful. We were able to raise a lot of money for the nonprofits that we chose, and we were able to shine a very bright spotlight on them. And then I've just repeated that process 3 more times. And, the fifth book will come out hopefully this year in the Standing O series. So it's just been a different way. I was not looking to monetize the book for myself. I was looking at the opportunity to monetize the book for the betterment of a nonprofit that I thought was doing great work. So we've been successful in doing that, 4 times. And until I run out of interesting friends, I'll continue to put different versions of the Standing O series out there.
I think that's absolutely amazing. And I think giving back is a very important key piece to any business model. And it doesn't always look the same as writing a check all the time. And have no doubts that you'll ever run out of important friends to go ahead and include in the Standing O. You're in New York, right? Which is the media capital of the world, but also full of pretentious assholes who think that Harvard journalist degrees make them special somehow. How does someone without family connections or a trust fund actually build influence and that network in that environment?
I don't think any of that stuff matters. Funny story. My favorite Aunt Betty, rest her soul, for years and years didn't realize where I went to college. So she thought I went to Harvard. So I'll never forget this. I was sitting in her living room and she was with a friend, and she said to her friend, we're so proud of Scotty. We're so proud of Scotty. He graduated from Harvard. And I said, what? And she said, "Well, we're so proud of you. You went to Harvard." And I said, "No, I went to Hartford. I went to the University of Hartford." And she was like, "Oh my God, all these years she thought I went to Harvard and I went to Hartford." So I don't think where you went to school matters. I think how you show up matters, and people with access and influence and that have done great things, they've been used and abused by lots of people who are always looking to take advantage of their influence or their fame. And when they come across somebody who genuinely is just looking for a friendship, and looking to potentially be a resource in some way, shape, or form, you tend to build really incredible relationships. So, I grew up very poor. I grew up very poor in an affluent town. So I think I understood both sides of the equation. And I've always just been true to myself and wanted to show up authentically and always try to figure out what I can do for other people, not what they can do for me. And that has been, a very powerful recipe for success. And so I don't think that where you went to school, it may give you a little bit of a leg up initially in terms of initial connections, but I've been able to build a really great life for myself and my family and my friends and, you know, uh, my coworkers, because of all of these relationships, because I show up with the expectation of, the outcome being a friendship, winding up in my bank account.
Absolutely. Last question, I promise, I think on publishing, which is really around, are you crazy or is everyone else missing something obvious in this day and age?
I mean, people definitely questioned whether it made sense to put out a physical magazine instead of just purely digital. So our publication is available in both formats. And, so most people thought that, this physical magazine didn't make sense to publish something like this. And again, maybe it's just the contrarian in me. I'm like, well, if nobody's doing it, that's going to make me just inherently different just because I'm going to do it. But I have found my wife's probably a great example. She won't even look at the digital version until she has the hard copy in her hand. It's just how she wants to consume the content. And I think we're always going through these cycles where what's old is new again. And whether you see that now with vinyl records and people really enjoying that experience, which, went from vinyl records to 8-track tapes to cassette tapes to CDs. And now it's like we've come full circle and those stores that used to sell vinyl that went out of business, now they're popping back up again because people kind of crave what's old is new again. So we've found a lot of success with having a physical magazine. And yes, people thought it was crazy. I would have thought it would be crazy and kind of boring if we didn't do it that way.
I mean, you're preaching to the choir over here. So I'm a big believer in physical copies of books. I consider it wealth. If you think about your magazine, last time I checked, coffee tables have still not gone out of style, despite all of what X, Twitter, and everything else is saying about it. So you still need something to put there and you still need something to read. And doctor offices still have magazines. So I think that's something. Thinking about something new in particular. When someone comes to you with their careers in chaos, what's your actual process of turning that into an opportunity? A lot of my viewers are in a transition, whether later in their careers or in mid career transitions. Can you help us go ahead and think through that thought process?
You've got to really think about not really what you've done in the past, but what really lights you up. What do you really want to do in the future? And you have to get clear with that. You really have to understand what you're chasing. And I think oftentimes people don't want to be left out of an opportunity. Will say, like, I'm open to everything. And I would say, if you're open to everything, you're kind of open to nothing. People don't know what to do with you. When you're very specific and you say, I really would love an opportunity to do this specifically, then people are really able to help you. And, the number one thing that anyone needs to do is triple down on the people that they know, because that's almost always where the next new great opportunity is going to lie. It doesn't mean that you're never going to find it on a job board or you're not going to find it through a recruiting firm, but the best way possible is to leverage the people that know you. And most people truly don't, they don't make the investment in other people So their networks are fairly weak, although most people think they're really good at building relationships. And I would say most people are not very good at building relationships. Problem is, Tiffany, everyone has relationships. Inherently, if you have relationships, you're like, well, I have relationships. I'm good at building relationships. But for instance, when people come on a call to talk to me, 99% of the time, I know more about them than they know about me. I would say, well, that's probably a pretty good indication that you're not that great at building relationships because you didn't do anything to try to figure out who I am, what I'm interested in, what I do. And in today's day and age of social media and content everywhere, you can figure that stuff out in a very, very short period of time.
Absolutely. You literally stole my question from me, which is most people are fucking terrible at building relationships. They either come across as desperate or they come across as fake. And you look at them and you're like, yeah, but how's your relationship with your wife? And they'll be like, well, I mean, she lives in the house. What? Right? She's there. She's been there. That's the relationship. So, what is the biggest mistake you see super smart people and successful people make when they are trying to build these relationships as well as influence?
Lazy, they don't do their homework. People just flat out are lazy and don't do their homework. I think it's as simple as that. We live in a world where it's pretty easy to be lazy. It's pretty easy to accept that Zoom call or accept that meeting and just kind of roll into it and hope for the best. It's not a great recipe for success. And I think because I have a competitive athletic background and I also my boys were in the military. I have a lot of friends that were in the military. Like there's not a lot of winging it in sports and there's not a lot of winging it in the military. Like you come with a plan and that's how you wind up successful. So you just have to be prepared. It's important to know that Tiffany Hart's birthday is September 16th. Like you either do your homework or you don't.
Super impressive. Somebody told me that in today's society, because there's social media and there's, like you said, this hyper scalability of reach, a lot of people treat relationships as though they're disposable. And because of that, like you just said, they don't put the time, the effort, or the energy into building those relationships. So if you leave one company, those relationships that you have, you kind of let die on the vine. And why would you do that? Do you see that this is also the same in how you're approaching people and how they're approaching their next career move?
It happens all the time. People don't have a system for managing their relationships. So they do things just come and go and things atrophy. If you don't use, whether it's your muscles or whatever, you're going to atrophy and relationships are the same. I mean, we're very fortunate that we're in an environment now where you can interact with a lot of different people and have different touch points every single day. Just on social media, liking and commenting a post, it tells something, it communicates something to somebody. Leaving a video message for them or sending them a text or calling them on the phone or writing them a note or all the different things that we have at our disposal. There's no real excuse for it happening, but we live in a very lazy world.
Not always, even in the modern society, do we always get the chance to engage as much as we'd like to. But that at least once a year, I do sit down and I reflect. Thinking about it or switching gears a little bit, let's talk about failure. Have you ever had a client or a strategy that completely shit the bed or even a business? And what did it teach you? Because I find that's where the real lessons lie in life.
Yeah, I mean, it happens all the time. I think one of the things that great entrepreneurs do, great business owners, or even people in sports, you learn from the lesson, but you learn from the lesson quickly. I'm not talking about like it takes you 3 months to learn from the lesson. You process right away what was the lesson, and then you move on. So I'm blessed with amnesia. I heal very quickly. So I've had a gazillion failures, but like if you say like give me some failures, I don't know, I'd have to really think about it because I don't dwell on those failures. Also, I reframe failure. I think of failure as research. I don't think of failure as being a bad thing. I just think like, I'm going to try a lot of different things, and some of them are going to work, and some of them are going to be moderately successful, and some of them will not be successful at all. And that's just research. That's just R&D. And that's how I think about it. So I don't think about it in kind of concrete terms of this was a success, this was a failure. It's like, okay, this didn't quite work the way I thought it was going to work. How do I tweak that? And so I'm a big believer in living into the answers. Living into the answers means you do not have to understand how things are going to transpire 97 steps down the road. Like most people, before they've started a business, they're already trying to figure out what their exit is. And I'm like, just take one step at a time. You can't completely see the future, but what you can do is live into the answers. And what that means is that you're going to do a lot of things scared because you're not going to have all the data. But as you take a step forward, as you take messy action into the future, you're gaining more data points every single step of the way, and you're figuring it out as you go. So I always have an idea of where I want to go, and then I live into that answer and I let it unfold the way that it's meant to unfold. I think if I tried to choreograph every single step, I would probably be frustrated because that's not really how it works. I mean, we all know that like success is not like this. Success is this, and you might wind up here, but it's a circuitous path. It doesn't happen seamlessly. So I don't know if that answered your question or if I just went on a massive tangent.
I've done a lot of consulting recently for startups, a space that I didn't think I would be doing. Like build out the framework as best as you possibly can, but the most important step is just launch. Just do it. Because most of us live in that messy in between. Whether you're a CEO of a company that's going through a digital transformation, has never done it before. You don't have a guidebook. It doesn't work like that. A lot of it is that messy in between. And as you get more data points, like you said, that lived experience, you become better at what you're doing. But I think that a lot of people are going through those changes. And I also think of all those people that just didn't launch, failed to launch, and what things have we missed in the world? But going back a little bit, thinking about the media landscape, it is in complete chaos. It's a lot different than it was previously. Twitter turned into X, Facebook to Meta, algorithm changes, podcast oversaturation. If I would have researched, I probably would have said, no, this is not the market, but I did anyways, and here we are. AI content is everywhere. It is so prolific and invasive. It's disgusting. How do you really navigate that chaos instead of being destroyed by it? Right?
Yeah, I don't pay attention to it. It's very similar to as an investor, I don't pay any attention to the market. I'm in it for the long haul, and I know that consistently investing, doing dollar cost averaging, which sounds super boring, but it's super effective. That's the path to success. When it comes to things like social media, for me personally, I just know that if I consistently show up, meaning I'm consistently putting out content, there's a good chance I'm going to be successful. I don't worry about the algorithm. I don't worry about trying to game the system. It's the same thing as trying to game the stock market. You may get lucky here and there, but that's not really how it works. It's more about consistency. So I don't worry about it is, I mean, very turbulent and there's a lot of stuff going on, and people can get very preoccupied with things like AI, like, oh my God, AI is going to take my job or this, how does, and I'm not saying be oblivious, don't try to understand new technology, but don't let that stuff throw you off your game because at the end of the day, unfortunately, it's the boring shit that really makes a difference. It's pounding that rock every single day, nonstop, all day, every day. And eventually that rock cracks. If you think, okay, I'm going to find the biggest sledgehammer out there. And in one fell swoop, I'm going to crack that rock. Good luck. That's probably not going to work. But we live in a society where people want things to happen quickly, but it's not reality. So I think once you accept that, I'm going to have to do hard stuff to be successful. But I know that most people aren't going to be willing to make the same investment. And so because of that, I'm going to be willing to put in the hard work that's necessary to see the success that I want. I know other people are not going to do that.
Absolutely. I think that a lot of it has a misperception. Talking about AI, honestly, I don't want AI to write my emails or do my art for me. I'd rather it fold my laundry and do my dishes, but I don't see Rosie. But, in this world, I feel like there's a lot around. Everybody wants eyeballs. Everybody, like you said, wants the attention. They're screaming louder more frequently into a mic. But both you and I know that that doesn't necessarily equal influence, and it sure as shit doesn't equal money. How do you go ahead and stay true to your vision, knowing that the payoff will come? I know that you said you just keep cracking at a rock that nobody else will crack at. Where do you really find that self-belief? How do you find that belief? And what is the real keys to being a startup founder?
Key to being a startup founder. The key to being a founder in any business is the ability to answer probably three questions that are incredibly simple, but most people can't answer them. I think it goes back to why are a lot of people failing as entrepreneurs? Because a lot of people probably should not be entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurship is very sexy right now and it's very in vogue. So everyone wants to be an entrepreneur because people want to control their time or they want to control their destiny or they think they're going to make $1 gazillion. But that's not the case for everybody. Not everybody is designed for that. And there's a little bit of a stigma when people talk about corporate. When I do the air quotes corporate, like corporate is seen as this like evil negative thing. I don't think that's the case at all. I think most people should work for a company. They should probably not be entrepreneurs. The reason I say that is I think there's three things, simple things. But when I ask people these questions, a lot of times they don't have the answer. What problem do you solve?
Mm,
Big is that problem? And how significant is that problem? Meaning, how big, how many people have the problem, but how significant is that problem? So you could have 1 million people that have the problem, but the significance of the problem is not great. So, in other words, like on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being like, I'm going to die if I don't get the solution, one being like, it's an annoyance, but I can live, with this problem. If you're at like a 2, a 3, or a 4, like even if 1 million people have the problem, it's not a
yeah,
significant problem.
yeah,
So you have to understand, what problem do I solve? How significant is that problem and how big is that problem? And then the last is, how are you uniquely qualified to solve that problem? And most people can't answer those questions. And I would say once you're able to answer those questions, you're able to determine, oh, I think I've got a business, because you can identify the problem. You understand how big the problem is, how significant it is, and how you're uniquely qualified to solve it. That's the best starting point you can be at. But try it today. Ask a few entrepreneur friends of yours those three questions, pretty simple questions, and see what happens. I think you'll find that a lot of people cannot answer those questions.
to tell you that I never wanted to be an entrepreneur. My family were all small business owners, and that seemed like the worst decision to ever go in my entire life. But yeah, I think you're right about that. And I think that understanding the marketplace is very different. I mean, just being 100% honest, I learned that offshore anything you possibly can quite early on in my lifetime.
That's not necessarily a lazy thing. That could be very smart. You could be saying, like, you know what? my talents are better served me doing this than doing that. And if you can outsource it and it makes economic sense, then I say go for it.
I think it absolutely makes economic sense for I think a large portion of a lot of people in the world if they really thought about it and weren't trying to live up to some standard that society tells them, which is completely absolute bullshit. When you could hire somebody out for, you know, basically 10%, 20% of what you're making. So I'm a big proponent of offshoring anything that's possible so you can really focus your time thinking about impact on the world. If someone were be listening to this podcast right now, they want to have real influence, not just social media followers, but actual power to change their trajectory. What is the first concrete step that you can give them to do?
Start building real relationships based on the goal of being a friend. If you build enough real relationships, relationships are like insurance. So too many people, they wait. They've had maybe a successful career in a certain industry and then they hit a speed bump and all of a sudden they're looking for employment, but they really haven't done a great job of building relationships. And now they're screwed and now they're scrambling. So you have insurance and you invest in insurance before the accident. But so many people wait for the accident and then they go, oh shit, the house is on fire and now they're trying to, take care of that situation rather than being preventative and saying, what can I do when I don't have the pain of the loss of a job or whatever the case may be? And for me, that's pouring into other people and building unique friendships that all of a sudden, when the shit does hit the fan and you're in that position, you have all this built-in insurance, you have career insurance, and all of a sudden you're not in the same situation as many of your peers who may be in a similar situation but didn't take the time or the effort to build those relationships.
I can't agree more. I think that, my philosophy comes from the investor side, which is investing in people that have empathy, the ability to build bridges where there are none, are some of the greatest investments you could possibly make. Not the person with the A's, not the person with the certificates, not the person with, paperwork and titles, but the people that really can build those relationships are going to go farther ahead in the future. And as we have more AI, people are really going to want that human connection. Just two more questions before we wrap up. On, really looking at your journey, what's one thing you really wished you would have known at the beginning that could have changed everything, got you to this point faster?
I never think about that stuff. Here's the reason why. I think it's a total waste of time. I think it's a complete waste of time. You can't change the past. And so, yes, I could say I should have jumped in and been an entrepreneur earlier, but that's all speculation and it's all looking in the rearview mirror. So again, I'm not giving you the answer that you want, but maybe it's just the outlier in me. I would say I don't think it's a bad question. I think for me it's irrelevant to me. It doesn't matter. I don't think about it. I don't care. I can't change it. So I just don't spend any time. Like, I don't ruminate. This goes back to the amnesia healing quickly thing. I don't ruminate about the business deal I lost or the research that I did that somebody might say is a failure. I don't spend any time on that. I don't care. It doesn't matter to me. I've figured out what I could learn from it and I've moved on. So I guess that's my answer.
I have to tell you, that's the exact reason why I wanted you on, is because you and Anthony Scaramucci both gave me answers that I completely didn't see coming. One was his about legacy, and he said, I don't fucking think about it, I'll be dead and nobody will remember. And you're talking about, what is something you could have told yourself and you're like, fuck it, I don't remember that either because it doesn't matter. It's irrelevant. There's an old fashioned saying, tear in the bucket, fuck it, chuck it. And that's how I move forward through life. Final question, one insight would you give to somebody that's an outlier, that's like you, that may be younger, that's starting to come up through the ranks, that really could help them to go ahead and have those clarifying moments where they're like, don't ruminate, don't, continue to build those relationships? What is the one thing you would tell them to immediately start turning their chaos and all of those dark thoughts into an opportunity that they can action tomorrow?
Yeah, believe in yourself. And when you pour into other people, they'll pour back into you, and that will help you believe in yourself even more. And understand that adversity is a gift. People think of adversity again as a bad thing. Adversity is a gift. Every bad thing that's ever happened to me has probably been the impetus for every great thing that's ever happened to me. So I just reframe adversity to me, like adversity also builds your resiliency. So there's always a shitstorm that's going to happen. Always. I don't care who you are. I don't care where you're at in your life. There's always a storm, and it may be an economic recession. It might be a war. It might be a pandemic. It might be loss of a job. It could be a million things. It's coming. 100% it's coming. It's just a matter of, are you ready for it? Are you prepared? And if you haven't been to the proverbial gym to build your resiliency and to build those muscles through adversity, you're going to get blown over by like a stiff wind. So looking at adversity instead of like, oh my God, this is a terrible thing, it's like, this is awesome because this is going to make me stronger, because there's something, I don't know what it is, but I know there's something coming my way, and I'm going to be able to weather that storm. Reframing what adversity means and seeing it as a gift. And also, in your worst moments, and without going into excruciating detail, like if I told people my life story, most people would say, it can't be true. Like, that's a little too crazy. I don't really believe that. But in my worst moment, if I thought about the amount of people that would be behind me, that would take my place in that moment, at my worst moment, the line behind me, Tiffany, is so freaking long. I could never see the end of it. And that is the case for everybody. So in your worst moment, there are people that would trade places with you in a nanosecond. So don't feel like a victim, and understand that adversity is a gift.
Absolutely. In the darkest of night, it's when we can go ahead and see most clearly the light that is shown by the stars. Scott, thank you so much. To find out more about Scott and what he's doing, go to trysomethingNewNow.com, the Outlier Project, which I can't highly recommend more. And, for more. This has been Confluently. If you're getting value from these conversations about how power actually gets built, hit subscribe and leave a review. It helps others to go ahead and find the show and keeps us bringing on guests who aren't afraid to tell how shit is actually made and how influence, power, money, failure, and resilience actually works. I'm Tiffany Hart. Embrace being an outlier, and I'm the fuck out. See you on the next one.